You think wars begin when swords are drawn. You think power struggles start when rivals openly attack. You are wrong. By the time conflict becomes visible, the outcome has already been decided. The battlefield is only the final performance. The real war happens long before that, in reputation, in preparation, in fear, in perception. And if you do not understand this, you will always enter conflicts already defeated. This is Purely Noetical. On this channel, we study power, strategy, human behavior, and the uncomfortable truths history keeps proving again and again. Today, you will learn why Machiavelli believed preparation in peace wins wars before they begin, why reputation can defeat enemies without confrontation, why fear prevents rebellion more effectively than love, why threats must be crushed early, and how structural power silently determines outcomes before open struggle appears. This is not about manipulation for cruelty. This is about understanding reality as it is not as we wish it to be. Now, let us begin. Machiavelli's realism begins with a refusal to flatter human nature. He does not describe people as they should be. He describes them as they repeatedly prove themselves to be under pressure. In The Prince, when he calls men ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous, he is not venting emotion. He is laying a strategic foundation. His argument is simple. If you build your power on the belief that people will remain loyal out of love or gratitude, you are building on sand. People support you when it benefits them. They withdraw when the cost becomes too high. They promise loyalty when they feel secure. They reconsider that promise when circumstances change. Fear of loss, desire for gain, envy, and ambition constantly compete with allegiance. Machiavelli observes this pattern not as a moral complaint, but as political reality. From this view, loyalty is not permanent. It is conditional. It survives only while it aligns with interest or fear. If that is true, then a ruler who waits for open betrayal has already miscalculated. By the time betrayal becomes visible, it has already matured in private conversations and silent doubts. Conspiracies grow quietly. Dissatisfaction spreads slowly. Public rebellion is only the final stage of a long hidden process. That is why Machiavelli insists that power must be secured before loyalty is tested. A wise ruler does not wait to see who will remain faithful under pressure. He builds structures that make disloyalty dangerous and loyalty beneficial. He shapes incentives and consequences so clearly that betrayal becomes unattractive. Stability is not achieved by trusting human goodness. It is achieved by understanding human weakness. This same realism explains why Machiavelli tells the prince to devote himself entirely to the art of war, even in peaceful times. In chapter 14, he states clearly that a ruler should think of nothing but war, its discipline, and its organization. Not because war is constant, but because the possibility of war is constant. Peace is temporary. Threat is permanent. A ruler who relaxes during calm seasons creates vulnerability. Soldiers grow undisciplined. Systems weaken. Confidence becomes complacency. When crisis finally appears, it exposes years of neglect. Preparation cannot be improvised. It must be built gradually. The prince who trains his army daily does not fear invasion. Readiness removes uncertainty. Discipline replaces panic. Structure replaces chaos. When pressure arrives, he responds with habits already formed. The leader who studies strategy in advance does not freeze when confronted with danger. He has already imagined scenarios. He has already weighed possible outcomes. He has already rehearsed decisions long before events force him to act. Conflict is won in rehearsal, long before performance. The visible battle may last days. Its outcome was shaped months or years earlier. Victory belongs to the one who prepared when nothing seemed urgent. But Machiavelli goes deeper than military readiness. He understands something psychological. He writes that men judge more by the eye than by the hand. In simple terms, people respond to appearances. They react to what they see. They respond to what they believe. Reputation shapes reaction. If you are known to be decisive, rivals hesitate. If you are known to punish betrayal swiftly, betrayal decreases. If you appear weak or uncertain, challenges multiply. The appearance of strength can prevent attacks that actual strength would otherwise have to confront. This is not about empty image. It is about understanding how human beings assess risk. They measure danger based on perception. They calculate consequences based on reputation. A ruler who manages his image carefully reduces the number of tests he must endure. Fear of consequence prevents rebellion. Respect for competence discourages competition. Confidence projected outward stabilizes those who depend on leadership. Power, in Machiavelli's realism, is not merely the ability to respond to threats. It is the ability to shape conditions so that threats hesitate to emerge. It is secured through preparation. It is strengthened through discipline. It is protected through reputation. And by the time open conflict appears, the deeper struggle has already been decided. Power is often perception before it becomes force. Robert Greene echoes this centuries later. Conceal your intentions, control your image, crush threats completely. But Machiavelli taught it first. A prince must appear virtuous, even if he must act against virtue when necessary. Appear merciful, faithful, humane, but remain ready to act ruthlessly if survival demands it. The appearance stabilizes the state. The readiness secures it. Now consider fear. Machiavelli asks the famous question, is it better to be loved or feared? His answer is clear. It is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Why? Because love is conditional. It depends on emotion. Fear depends on consequence. Fear creates deterrence, and deterrence prevents conflict before it starts. A ruler who punishes rebellion decisively makes rebellion unattractive. The conflict dies in imagination before it reaches reality. Thomas Hobbes later supports this logic in Leviathan. He argues that without a powerful sovereign, humans descend into a state of perpetual insecurity, a war of every man against every man. The fear of chaos pushes people to accept authority. Fear, when structured, becomes order. Machiavelli understood this long before Hobbes formalized it. But there is another layer. In Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli returns again and again to one central warning. Disorders do not explode overnight. They begin as small imbalances, minor grievances, quiet resentments, private ambitions. If these early movements are ignored, they grow roots. What could have been corrected with minimal force later demands extreme measures. Machiavelli studies the Roman Republic carefully and notices a pattern. When tensions between social classes were addressed early through firm institutional action, Rome stabilized itself. When corruption or ambition was tolerated, it multiplied. Delay did not produce peace. Delay produced escalation. Small conspiracies become organized factions. Organized factions become rebellions. Rebellions become revolutions. Weak rivals who are dismissed as harmless accumulate allies, resources, and legitimacy over time. If they are allowed to mature, they become far more dangerous than they ever needed to be. This is why Machiavelli argues that injuries, when they must be inflicted, should be inflicted in such a way that revenge is impossible. He is not glorifying cruelty. He is speaking about finality. Half measures create surviving enemies. Surviving enemies create future instability. If a threat must be removed, it must be removed completely. Cruelty, if necessary, must be swift and decisive. Not repeated, not gradual, not uncertain. Repeated punishment signals weakness. Hesitation signals fear, and fear invites retaliation. A rival who survives your attempt to weaken him becomes more cautious, more strategic, and more determined. But when decisive action ends the threat at its beginning, retaliation has no time to organize. For Machiavelli, this is not about emotion. It is about prevention. Power is secured by ending threats before they mature. It is easier to extinguish a spark than to stop a wildfire. Now extend this principle beyond individual rulers and visible conspiracies. Consider structural power. Thomas Piketty's research on wealth concentration reveals a similar pattern operating at the economic level. When capital accumulates faster than the broader economy grows, Wealth gradually concentrates in fewer hands. This concentration does not immediately produce conflict. At first, it appears as success, then as influence, then as policy advantage. Over time, those who control capital begin to shape institutions. Laws are written in ways that protect accumulation. Tax systems adjust subtly. Political campaigns become dependent on financial backing. Educational access reflects economic hierarchy. The structure begins to bend toward concentrated wealth. Narratives about merit, success, and opportunity adjust to justify the imbalance. This transformation is quiet. It is gradual. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment, but power is consolidating. By the time social unrest becomes visible, the structure has already been shaped. Inequality has already determined who holds influence. Institutions already reflect concentrated interests. The battlefield has been prepared long before protests erupt. Just as Machiavelli warns rulers to address disorders early, structural imbalances must be recognized before they solidify. Once wealth concentration reshapes political systems, reversing it becomes far more difficult. Minor economic gaps become systemic inequality. Systemic inequality becomes political polarization. Political polarization becomes instability. The lesson remains consistent across both personal and structural power. Threats grow when ignored. Imbalances expand when tolerated. Power shifts quietly before it shifts visibly. Whether in a palace or in an economy, the principle is the same. Intervene early. Act decisively when necessary. Understand that visible conflict is usually the final stage of a process that began long before anyone called it a crisis. Power belongs to those who recognize the early signs and respond before maturity makes correction costly. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. He would not be surprised by the idea that power operates quietly long before it becomes visible. In his view, institutions are not decorations of authority. They are its skeleton. Armies are not symbols of pride. They are instruments of survival. Alliances are not gestures of friendship. They are calculations of interest. Public perception is not a minor detail. It is a shield that protects or exposes the ruler. When these foundations are strong, conflict struggles to gain momentum. When they are weak, even small pressures produce fractures. Open conflict, in Machiavelli's framework, is rarely the true beginning. It is the visible crack in a structure that has been weakening for years. If institutions are corrupt, loyalty decays quietly. If armies are undisciplined, enemies observe patiently. If alliances are neglected, isolation grows unnoticed. If reputation deteriorates, challenges multiply silently. By the time confrontation erupts, the structure has already been compromised. The battle simply reveals what neglect has produced. This is why Machiavelli emphasizes foundations more than dramatic action. He studies how states endure, not just how they fight. He understands that strength must be organized before it is tested. Even modern thinkers like Michel Foucault describe power as something that flows through institutions, language, systems, and social norms. According to this view, power shapes how people think, speak, and behave long before force is ever required. Rules influence expectations. Language frames what is acceptable. Systems reward certain behaviors and discourage others. People adjust themselves to structures without needing visible coercion. Force becomes unnecessary when influence is already embedded in the environment. But remove the modern terminology, and the insight remains deeply familiar. Machiavelli saw this centuries earlier. He may not have used the same vocabulary, but he understood that power operates beneath the surface. It operates in perception, in preparation, in organization, in deterrence. Power is secured in the invisible phase, before the public sees it, before opponents recognize it, before crisis demands it. Reputation discourages attack because opponents calculate risk before acting. Preparation eliminates panic because readiness replaces confusion. Fear creates deterrence because consequences are understood in advance. Swift action prevents escalation because hesitation allows threats to gather strength. Structure shapes outcomes because systems determine what is possible long before individuals make choices. By the time conflict becomes visible, These elements have already done their work. The surface event is only the final expression of deeper arrangements. Machiavelli's core insight remains steady and clear. If you want to understand power, do not focus only on dramatic clashes. Examine the foundations. Examine the invisible phase. That is where outcomes are truly decided. If you wait for conflict to appear before you act, you are already late. Because by the time conflict becomes visible, decisions have already been made beneath the surface. Alliances have already formed. Resentments have already hardened. Opportunities have already shifted. Machiavelli's warning is not dramatic. It is practical. Visible confrontation is usually the final chapter of a much longer story. The wise leader studies the earlier chapters. He does not wait for the explosion. He studies the tension. He does not wait for betrayal. He studies ambition. He does not wait for invasion. He studies weakness. Machiavelli does not teach aggression for its own sake. He does not celebrate chaos. He does not encourage reckless force. What he teaches is anticipation. He teaches that human behavior follows patterns. Ambition seeks openings. Fear searches for safety. Greed looks for advantage. If you understand these patterns, you can act before they turn against you. If you ignore them, you are forced to react under pressure. And reaction is always more expensive than preparation. He teaches realism. Realism means seeing people as they are, not as you hope they will be. It means recognizing that loyalty can weaken, that success attracts envy, that weakness invites testing, that power unused appears uncertain. To be realistic is not to be cynical. It is to be aware. It is to measure risks honestly. It is to build strength quietly before it is demanded publicly. For Machiavelli, survival belongs to those who prepare in advance, those who understand that stability must be engineered, that reputation must be shaped, that discipline must be maintained, that authority must be reinforced before it is challenged. He believes survival favors the vigilant, not the hopeful. Now pause for a moment. Think about your own environment. Look at the people around you. Who loses influence suddenly? Was it truly sudden? Or were there warning signs that went unnoticed? Who commands quiet respect without constant confrontation? Chances are that respect was built long before it was ever tested. In your workplace, your community, your personal life, small tensions appear long before open disputes. Misunderstandings, subtle competition, shifts in attitude, ignored boundaries. If you wait until the argument becomes loud, you are already responding to a problem that has matured. But if you recognize early signs, you can adjust early. Clarify expectations, strengthen competence, reinforce standards, correct behavior before it spreads. This is anticipation in practice. This is realism applied quietly. Power does not begin at the moment of confrontation. It begins in awareness, in preparation, in positioning. And those who understand this rarely appear surprised by events, because they were never waiting for conflict to teach them what they should have already known. Who commands respect without speaking much? Who discourages opposition simply through presence? Who prepares quietly while others relax? Those individuals win before arguments even begin. This is not luck. This is positioning. Power is rarely dramatic in its acquisition. It is strategic. It is quiet. It is calculated. And by the time others recognize it, resistance is already too costly. Here is the purpose of this lesson. Do not focus only on visible battles. Focus on foundations. Strengthen your reputation. Build competence in silence. Control perception. Address threats early. Establish deterrence through consistency. Because in Machiavellian realism, the greatest victory is not defeating an enemy in open conflict. The greatest victory is ensuring that open conflict never becomes necessary. And that is how power is won before conflict begins. If you understand this, you will start preparing differently. If you apply this, you will position yourself differently. And if you return here consistently, you will build knowledge that compounds over time. Subscribe to Purely Noetical, because power does not belong to the loud. It belongs to the prepared. And preparation always begins before the world notices.